movie.
Greetings, travelers. I'm your host, the C-Dot that knows a lot, Dr. Waluigi. So, the last time I talked about a video game-based superhero, I felt like the character we looked at was a dated and, quite frankly, gross wannabe that didn't hold up compared to superheroes in other video games of today. However, in today's review, I want to take a look at a good example of an original 90s video game superhero. One that, while his creator is a complete and utter POS, still holds up and has continued to be remade in the modern day. This is my review of the 90s platform superhero video game, Earthworm Jim. The game was developed by Shiny Entertainment and published by Playmates Interactive Entertainment. The concept for Earthworm Jim began when Playmates wanted to create a toy line that would then be developed into a video game, which was a new and ambitious concept for the time after Playmates saw their growing success with the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles franchise. They hired indie comic book writer Doug TenNapel to create the character after they saw a drawing he was working on in his free time, which led to Doug meeting with the head of Shiny Entertainment, David Perry, where he bought the rights to and would create the mechanics for the game and some of the other characters, while Doug would work on the level design and some ideas, and even voice Jim. The game was released on both the Sega Genesis and Super Nintendo in October of 1994 and went on to be a huge success, selling 1 million copies worldwide and creating an entire franchise consisting of 2 sequels, toys, comic books, and even a 2-season TV series starring Simpsons alumni Dan Castellaneta as the voice of Earthworm Jim. The character was popular enough that in 2010, the game got a full HD remake for the PS3, Xbox 360, and mobile phones, which was taken down after the company who owned the game at the time, Gameloft, lost the rights and had to take it off of the digital networks. I will say that I never grew up with a Super Nintendo, so I only recently played the game last year, and I found it to be quite fun and challenging, enough for me to check out the sequels in the TV series. However, I do have to mention the elephant in the room that is Doug TenNapel. Sadly, the man is a giant douche canoe, having slandered against the LGBTQ community, and is a Trump supporter. I will say that I do not agree with this man's statements, and that he can burn in the fires of hell along with Cheeto Head. But also that while Doug has control over the comic book side of things, the video games are still owned by Interplay Entertainment, who, as far as I'm aware, have distanced themselves from Doug and his horrible viewpoints on life. Now that we've got that bullshit out of the way, let's get back to the silliness that is the game's premise. The game follows our hero, Earthworm Jim, as he travels through 7 levels to try and escape from the henchmen of the evil Queen Slugforabutt, as the supersuit that he wears belongs to her and she wants it back. Will Jim be able to escape the clutches of the evil queen and save the queen's hot sister, Princess What's-Her-Name, or will Jim fall captive and become a regular worm again? As far as the presentation goes, this game looks really damn good for 1994. Keep in mind that this game came out during the end of the SNES and Genesis part of the console war, which meant that most game companies were focusing on the next wave of gaming, especially with 3D games starting to grow in popularity. So a game like this had very little competition since the game was probably not going to be on anyone's radar. But I will say that the creators did a good job of making a comic book world with lots and lots of parody and gross-out style humor. Yes, much like how Interplay's Booger Man tackled the same humor and is considerably dated, Earthworm Jim took the same approach, but I feel that this game succeeded more because there wasn't as much focus on the gross-out humor, and instead focuses more on the parody side of the level design. Though there are differences between the Genesis and the Super Nintendo versions. Specifically, the final level is a lot more gross on the Genesis than the Super Nintendo version. The only other main difference that I do have to point out is that the Genesis version has much better sound design, as it has a lot more harder and gruffer tones compared to the Super Nintendo, which is very soft and kind of muffled. So, my fellow travelers, if you are thinking of choosing which version of the game to play, I recommend the Genesis version as it has the much better sound design, though the gameplay is much the same regardless of which version you pick up. When it comes to the gameplay, the controls are very simple. Using the D-pad, you move Jim around the levels while using the Y button to fire your plasma blaster, though it does mean you can't move, and the D-pad becomes your way of moving around when you fire the blaster. You also have a secondary attack as well as a way to move objects around with the A button, as that causes you to use Jim's head as a whip. The B button is what makes you jump, and if you press it repeatedly, it makes Jim spin his head like a helicopter. And finally, the X button turns Mrs. Schultz's porch light on? In Germany? Hey, I'm not kidding, that's what it says in the manual. Okay, this was a joke by the creators since the game came out on the Genesis first, and that controller had only 3 buttons. So obviously, this version also only uses 3 buttons. But suffice to say, you travel through the worlds facing off against some pretty wacky villains like Psychro, Evil the Cat, and Professor Monkey for a head. You face these bosses after clearing the final of the 3 stages, and then you fly to the next stage on a rocket where you race against Psychro and have to collect blue orbs. While this may sound easy to all of you younger gamers out there, do not be fooled, as this game is hard. Like, really hard. There are a lot of usual bullshit deaths, annoying moments where you swear the controller is fighting against you, and the water level where you have to pass through a maze on a time limit while also having to make sure your watercraft doesn't take too much damage. Bottom line is this: if you're going to attempt to play this game, make sure you play a few other SNES or Genesis games before you do, because this game will test your patience and you will end up throwing the controller at the wall or TV. Despite the game's rocky history, it is one I do think is worth checking out for those who want a much better look at 90s gross-out humor compared to that of the dated and ugliness that was Boogerman. The only thing I will say is a major downside for me was that the game's sound on the Super Nintendo was so toned down it wasn't as great as it was on the Genesis. But that's really the only negative I have when talking about this version of the game. Well, that and the fact this game is extremely difficult after the 4th level. Overall, I give Earthworm Jim a 7 out of 10. It is another on the controller breaking difficult scale, but it does have a lot of charm to it that makes the game worth finishing from beginning to end. Thanks for watching, I'm Dr. Waluigi, and remember, don't judge a book by its cover, cause you'll never know what's inside. Good night, everyone.